G'day, this is a quick review of the King's 200 watt solar blanket. We used it for a few months while going around Queensland, and we needed 4 of these because we had a 48 volt system in our RV with massive lithium battery banks, so we could run the air conditioner, the induction cooker, all the things that a family needs when we have kids and stuff and we're traveling. So we had 4 of these connected up, and I guess just a quick review of how that went. The output was matched to the manual. I'll show the pictures of how we had it set up. So output was fine. Keep in mind that the output only really takes off when the sun is directly overhead. Because it is a solar blanket, you kind of need to throw it out or over something. And I could only get the decent output when the solar panels were directed at the sun, for obvious reasons. But the problem with the solar blanket is you can't easily direct it to the sun. There are other solar blankets that have like a stand you can put on the back of them, so you can have them up on an angle and so forth. But yeah, unless you can do that with this one, because it folds, we couldn't do it. I tried hanging it up on an angle, tying ropes to the top. For life of me, I could not get this thing to output its decent rating. With especially with 4 of them, because I really needed them all to be in line and in series. So if one wasn't facing the sun, then the other 3 weren't able to produce their work. And you might say it was amplified. The problem was amplified, but it was very much there, even though I was using one to charge a 12 volt battery. And so from a recommendation point of view, I would not recommend this blanket, and I certainly wouldn't recommend from King's as well. Just from my personal experience from the sports people. Just to clarify, I picked these up from a reseller, an authorised King's reseller, because we're out in the middle of nowhere in Queensland. I couldn't go to a King's store. And when I pulled them out of the boxes, they didn't have the stickers on all the regulators. And when I contacted King's support, they told me that that's perfectly fine, everything will work fine. And they wouldn't offer any way, or stickers, they didn't offer the stickers that should have gone on top of this to explain what the lights do and what the buttons do. They didn't offer to replace them or replace the controllers. It was basically go away. And then I realised they're just another cheap factory kind of send it out, bulk it out and hope no one complains kind of thing. So I wouldn't use them again, honestly, after that support experience. But functionality, they did work as advertised, apart from you can't see what the lights do unless you look at the menu. And that's only for that model, obviously. But I've got some pictures set up of how we set it up for 48 volts. But the issue is that because you can't direct them at the sun, unless you put them on a hill that's perfectly facing the sun, but after X amount of hours, once the sun's gone across, then their energy level is going to drop off. And because of the way they're folded, yes, they fold down very neat, and that's part of the reason why we bought them. 200 watts fold down to a very small space. But when you're laying them out, there is just no way to get this thing focused at the sun, as it currently is. It's just, you need to make up some pole system or something to have it. You're just adding so much more complexity. Whereas the ones that only have 3 or 4 panels, I should say 4 panel ones, that just had it in a straight line, that had a kickback on it, I would absolutely go for them the next time around. I wouldn't get this one. And then at least you can set them up and point them at the sun and then move them as the sun goes around from that side of things. I did experiment with having them set up so that they're 6 volt cells. They're in series and in parallel. So those 2 cells, 6 volts makes 12 volts, so 12, 12, 12 in parallel. And what I did there for a while is I had it setting up like that. So it would be facing the sun, if you were the sun. And so I got energy on the bottom one, I got energy on the top one. And that kind of worked, but then I found out that because this one isn't facing the sun, only this one's facing the sun, and the one behind it isn't facing the sun. So the energy level was just as good as just having them thrown out on the ground. So there's just no point in doing that. You've got good 2 solar panels, but it was no better than having 6 not working solar panels from the efficiency point of view. But again, if you only need 4 hours of power and you're only going to put these out in the middle of the day, then it's fine. But if you need energy for the full course of the day, and you're like us, we really wanted that 200 watts to get for as most of the day as possible, having the 4 hours or maybe 3 hours really working in the middle just wasn't enough for us. 200 watts for 3 hours, we really needed 6 hours at least as energy for us. So it didn't work in our case. But if you're not looking for the 200 watts, and you're just looking for a large panel, but still, again, if you have one that has a kickback on it, it's so much better, and then you'll be able to move it around. And when we were traveling around, nobody had these panels. Everyone had the 4 ones pointing out for the long-time campers, and a few people had a smaller system on their bonnet of their car, but we were the only ones that had the big panels stretched out, and yeah, it didn't really work for us. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll flip over to some images of how we set up the 48 volt system and how I was doing it out there in Queensland, and go from there.
Okay, so here I've got an inverter set up. It was plugged into my laptop, I think, pumping a good 100 watts and onto the battery, so it's under load, and the battery voltage is showing 12 volts while being charged, so that just shows that 100% is under load. And then the next one I'll show the amperage of coming in. Now the amps of the thing was very, very good. So I was getting almost 11 amps there with this solar setup. So the 200 watt panel out, going through the regulator, and it was showing 11 amps, which is pretty good, but the sun was directly overhead. And as soon as that sun starts to move off, then I think I was getting down to our 7.3 amps. So you can see the sun's moved, I don't know, maybe an hour or something, hour and a half, moved over, and that amps drops off dramatically, especially once the panel gets a bit hot as well. And so the output is good, right? Don't get me wrong, the output is very, very good, but unless you face them into the sun, it doesn't work. And here's the 48 volt setup, just as information. And I've got them connected in series there, the 4 panels in series. So parallel in the panel itself, and then in series along that, getting, I think it was about 70 volts, 60, 70 volts coming out of that. And again, if it's facing the sun, there I've got a bit of a hill, so I was trying to capture the sun as it went across. And it was working, it was working well. The only catch is you only got about 4 hours of decent juice out of it, and then the sun would go down. As an example, so I was getting about 515 watts coming out of the 4 panels, so 800 watt of panel, and getting 514 watts, and and it was charging 8-9 amps, at 48 volts or 50 volts there. So I mean, it's very, very good, and it did a good job, but it's just the number of hours we were going to get was very, very limited, and we needed a lot more juice than that over a lot more period of time. So it didn't work out for what we were trying to do, and I wouldn't recommend it for anyone else to play with, primarily because when the panels are laid out like that, the worry was the kids' bikes were going to ride over them, somebody was going to walk over them without thinking. It was just such a large area of space to have it on the ground, and if I didn't lie it all neatly flat with an angle to try and get it towards the sun, I wasn't getting the right wattage. And it would be the same whether it was 1 panel or 4 panels. Laying these out on the ground would get dust and stuff on them. I just wasn't getting the energy, and if I laid it over my bonnet or somewhere else, even with 1 panel, unless all 6 of them are pointing directly at the sun, you just don't get the energy level. So great for camping and great for other times when you're happy just to throw these things out. But if you're looking for a decent amount of juice over the portion of the day, a good portion of the day rather than a few hours, not recommended for the setup that I did, and for anyone who needs a lot of juice for a long time. Get the fold-out ones with an angle and track the sun.